Brown Bag Biography session with Anjoli Roy on speculative nonfiction and ancestral haunting, writing with a great-grandfather I never met. My name is Cynthia Franklin. I'm acting director of CER while Craig House is on sabbatical. And I have to make my customary joke, but on a kind of sabbatical. So the Brown Bag series is the longest running seminar series at UH Manoa. Today's talk is number 868. It is co-sponsored by Peace Building LLC, the Center for Oral History, the School of Communication and Information, and the Departments of Anthropology, English, Ethnic Studies, and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. The series is originally the idea of George Simpson, Emeritus Director of the Center for Biographical Research, and it's organized, managed, and publicized by our GAs, Carson Campos, Kennedy Rodriguez, and of course also Carolyn Zuckerman is a kind of advisor on this, and also a lot of work goes into this with our managing editor, Nora Dunn. So thank you to all of you. So we have a really exciting lineup this semester, and you can see the full schedule back there. Join the mailing list if you're not already on it. The next two will be next week. Nathalie Segaral, UHM Associate Professor of French, will present on births in the death camps, pregnancy as resistance, and delayed Holocaust testimonies in French. And then on October 30th, Jack Taylor, Associate Professor in our English department, will give a talk on African migration and the novel, exploring race, civil war, and environmental destruction. So I'd like to note that today's talk is being recorded. So if you are here, you are consenting to that recording, and you may appear in the video. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce Anjoli Roy. So Anjoli is a creative writer and high school English teacher in Honolulu. Her ancestors are from India, Germany, England, and Ireland. Anjoli has a BA in Individualized Study from NYU and an MA and PhD in English from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She is a Voices of Our Nation Arts Foundation and a Jack Hazard Fellow. She is the author of the chapbook Enter the Navel for the Love of Creative Nonfiction in 2020. Her writing has appeared in a whole bunch of venues, including Asian American Literary Review, Lana, Campus, Long Reads, Menagerie, The Pinch, Poem a Day, River Teeth, Short Reads, many others. She has recently completed a book-length manuscript about her great-grandfather, the freedom fighter, Kali Nath Roy. This will be the topic of the Brown Bag today, and it comes with advanced rave reviews from S. Shankar, who was disappointed to have his class conflict with attending today, but he has asked me to share these words. And that's where I got the idea for inviting, because he was really raving about this manuscript that he was reading. As a writer, Anjoli is as rigorous as she is caring and committed. Her writing is filled everywhere with her big-hearted and compassionate personality. There are no shortcuts. It's all the long but rewarding way to the mountaintop of excellence. I love her memoir in progress about her great-grandfather for these qualities. Anjoli is also the coolest PhD I know, and this has been part of her work of creating literary community. And those of you who know Anjoli know that she is a creator of community. On her and Jocelyn Ng's It's Lit podcast and radio show, authors share soundtracks and talk with their hosts. There are 170 shows archived, and as a follow-up to today's Brown Bag, in addition to reading her published work, check out her podcast. As already clear from this introduction, Anjoli is a beloved friend and colleague to many of us here today, myself included. From 2016 to 2018, Anjoli served as the managing editor of Biography, and working with her was a privilege and a joy. She brought to this position more than 11 years of experience in publishing, including 3 years as associate editor of the Feminist Press and as managing editor of Women's Studies Quarterly. Her editorial expertise was just one of the many skills she brought to CER. We also welcome her to be here with us today as someone who has herself been in the role of coordinating this brown bag series. As a colleague, Anjoli's tremendous confidence was accompanied by her unfailing cheerfulness. To say we loved working with Anjoli is an understatement. I also know Anjoli as a gifted and accomplished creative writer, a dedicated and inspiring teacher, and a generous colleague who connected our department to various communities beyond the university. I had the privilege of working with Anjoli for about 8 years while she was a graduate student in our department, including as a member of her dissertation committee, and in organizing various events with her. Here are some of the things I know firsthand about Anjoli. She's a passionate and gifted teacher. She is a creative writer who deeply researches her material and who is unusually accomplished at her craft. Her explorations of family and identity provide insights into how we carry structural issues of race, class, immigration, colonialism, and gender in our bodies in complex and interconnected ways. Anjoli's optimism and the love she lavishes on those she writes about are accompanied by a willingness to take risks and to grapple with hard and sometimes painful subject matter. And I think this is one of the things that really distinguishes Anjoli from me, is just doing that with such a big heart. It's never at the expense of those she writes about, nor is it a foreshortening of hard questions. Anjoli has tremendous dexterity when it comes to interweaving archival research with family stories, her own and her family members, and in navigating sometimes conflicting memories and meditations and imaginings. Time for you to see this for herself. Please join me in welcoming Anjoli.
Oh man, I don't know if I can live up to this. Okay, I didn't test this. I should have tested this. Do I need this? Test. No. Test. I can project. No, you're fine. We got so into just chatting with each other, and then I forgot to do the thing. It also gives me a second to recuperate or to recover from that beautiful introduction. I feel like this happened like last time when I gave a brown bag, or maybe the time of, this is my third one, I realized. But I gave one in 2014, and Craig gave my introduction, and there's like a unique genre for brown bag introductions that feels a little bit like a eulogy. Like the most thoughtful and caring people, and I'm just like, again, I'm done. But I lived. Somebody saw me, and they saw all the things I hope for about myself, and that's the end. But here we are. Yeah, that's okay. Can you hear me if I speak up? Yeah. I do teach high school, so I feel like I can handle. Thank you so much for coming today and for being curious enough to want to hear about this weird project. For the writers in the room, I hope this maybe activates some approaches to how we can maybe engage with storytelling with ancestors. Or we can have like a debate about this, or like a fight. I always tell my students this, like, we can fight, let's fight. I don't want to fight, but I'm still thinking through these ideas, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm excited to have the space to get to talk to you about this. Cool, okay. So, yeah, God, I've been working on this book project forever. Like forever, it feels like. So I went to India in 2014 on a J. Waddle scholarship for the study of India, which allowed me to go for 2 months. And I went because I had randomly come across the fact that there's this freedom fighter in my family. Like, what? I was actually looking up the story of my Khulna, my dad's dad, and I was trying to figure out, that's another ancestor who I've never met. He died when my dad was 20. And I thought, I wonder, I don't really know the story of why he left India. And he left India in 1950, so I was thinking that's outside of like the standard kind of immigration narratives. It's kind of an anomalous year. And so I looked him up, and I ended up coming across a Wikipedia page for him that I later learned a cousin in India had put up, and they identified him as the son of freedom fighter Kali Nath Roy. It's like, what? And it was through looking up Kali Nath that I found this larger story about how he had been incarcerated in 1919 for seditious writing against the British, and that Gandhi had lobbied for his release from prison. And I just got really confused about why the story had not been passed down. And I was thinking, okay, this is like diaspora. Diaspora's big erasure kind of at work. And I thought that my cousins in India would know about him, surely. Surely we didn't know because, you know, my mom is white and I grew up in Southern California and I didn't have a lot of access to our Indian side of the family. I'd only been to India once when I was 11 for 2 weeks. But when I posted about it, I found like this, an entrance exam for this university in South India that was asking, one of the questions in the journalism program was like, of which newspaper was Kali Nath Roy the editor-in-chief? I was like, the Tribune! Like, I feel like I was passing tests already myself. And so I posted a screenshot of it, and I was like, isn't it crazy that this is our great-grandfather and blah, blah, blah. And my cousins responded almost immediately, and they were like, what are you talking about? So that really is what brought me to this project to begin with. Like, how does a family lose the story of a freedom fighter, and how does that story not get passed down? And that's really what animated my research for this project that I've been doing for a long time. So yeah, I went to India in 2014. The project was to recover the as much as I could of the official archive of this ancestor. Again, he wrote in English, which was really fortunate for me because I speak no South Asian language, let alone read one. And I really wanted to pay special attention to why he was imprisoned and what exactly happened in 1919, and you know, how did he end up getting connected to Gandhi and all the things. And so that was a part of my dissertation that I defended in 2017 in the History department. And I felt shy about it for some reason. Like, I was like, nobody's gonna care, right? Like, this is like medicine for my family, but like, that's it. And I remember actually Craig, sorry, I did cool people back to themselves, which is a blast. If I remember this correctly, but Craig had said during my defense, like, the manuscript catches on fire here. And I was like really surprised actually to hear that take, that it could be an interesting story for someone other than my family to read. And so in the subsequent years, 2017 to 2022, I was working on revising the text. I was revising. My training as a creative nonfiction writer is to have a lot of receipts, and so I was trying to make sure I was being as accurate as possible. You know, I kept a blog when I was in India, so I wanted to make sure what was the chronology of events that, as they occurred, if I'm retelling that part of the story, and then where are all the archival documents that I have, and where were the holes in the archive, and you know, I was like white knuckling this hold on like veracity. You know, that was really important to me. And the book grew and grew and grew, and I felt like it was true. It was like a true story. Okay, fine, yes, I did it. This is the story of me recovering the story of this ancestor. And I remember I sent it to a dear friend who has read it way too many times. A lot of us know him. So freaking beautiful, and that is my sorry. He never tells people that. It's fine. I like styled him on this day. It's fine. This is a picture by Brian Malik. And he was like, yeah, it's kind of like boring. He didn't say that. He didn't say that. But he was like, it's stayed, right? It's a little too, it needs like an imaginative injection. It needs development. And I thought I had done that in the way that I was telling my own experience of the story of recovering this, but like, it's kind of, yes, it is kind of hard to sit down and like make the story of someone poring over microfilm sound really interesting, right? He was like, what if you like take us to 1919? Like, let us meet Kali Nath. Like, let us hear him. And I was like, I can't do that. Like, what do you mean? I don't speak a South Asian language. He was based in Lahore, you know, present-day Pakistan. I've never been there. That's so out of pocket. Like, there's no way. And I fight with Reggie in my head all the time, and sometimes in real life also. But like the most frustrating thing about how much I love and respect him is that he's always right. Like I've yet to encounter a moment where he steered me wrong. And as hesitant as I was, I ended up entering into this realm that I am referring to as speculative nonfiction. I'm so off script right now, but I'm just chatty and I'm happy to be here with you. That's fine. So I started to experiment with letting myself write into the speculative realm. And I just basically told myself, like, I can always throw this out. Nobody has to know. Now I'm giving a talk about it. But like, yes, nobody has to know if this is a disaster, whatever. And at one point, I actually found myself sitting in the Pearl Ridge Shopping Center across from a kahu named Daryl, who a friend of mine visits with regularly and consults for guidance in her life. And he told me this. He said, close your eyes. And I did, and chairs grated against the concrete floor as people stood or sat back down, and cars pulled into the parking spot while others drove away. If you've been to this shopping center, it's busy. I remember hearing the wind flapping against the green canvas umbrella shading our table, and like the unpadded metal chair was like digging into my legs. And he said, ignore the sounds around you. And I felt the space around me go quiet. And he said, I want you to imagine that someone is standing close to you. They aren't touching you, but they are close enough for you to feel them there. I took a deep breath. I felt my awareness expand and contract. Can you feel them? I felt a presence standing next to me, a few inches from my left shoulder. I flinched. That's him, he said. My eyes flew open. Your ancestor, he's with you all the time, Daryl said matter-of-factly. A smile moved at the corner of his mouth. Let him in. It doesn't have to be so serious. He wants you to have fun with this. Before I left Daryl that day, he reminded me to sit with Kali Nath, to invite him in whenever I was writing, close as a person standing beside me who I could sense even without touching. I struggled with this idea of imagining my disembodied ancestor appearing over my shoulder as I wrote, but I tried to imagine Kali Nath nodding me on the way onlookers do, like in a foot race. It meant something to me to be able to imagine his approval. It meant something to me to be able to imagine his permission. Rather than the book simply being about my experience of poring over microfilm in Kali Nath's official archives in Delhi, told in the form of memoir, I incorporated imaginative chapters to immerse myself and the reader in eras and places where Kali Nath lived. I conjured his writing desk within his newspaper offices on Mall Road in Lahore. I conjured his family back in Khulna, where his widowed mother lived and where Kali Nath's children were first born. I researched these eras and places to scaffold the scenes I wrote, and I let myself do something I had guarded myself against for a long time. I loosened my hold on the desire for veracity and instead leaned into what felt like truth. Yes, I couldn't verify that red oxide floors and the veranda of his family home, since my family fled that space during partition, never to return, but they did feel true. Yes, I did know that his offices were on the second floor of the Tribune's buildings, but I didn't know if he was the first person to open its doors and the last ones to leave them at night. But did that feel true? I worked to wet and revive what the archive showed me in the dry space of newspaper print. The challenge was the storytelling was not straightforward. The more the official archives uncovered, raising questions that the elders in my family either could or could not answer, the more and more I had to revise the stories I'd been telling myself about my ancestor's life. And because The Bell in the Body, that's the title of this manuscript, is the story of reconnecting with Kali Nath, it felt important to include those revisions in the story. In this sense, the manuscript's chapters set in Kali Nath's life became mutually exclusive and speculative. This might not sound like radical work in terms of creative writing. It could just sound like the work of historical fiction and a narrator correcting their storytelling as they went, but for a creative writer, a creative nonfiction writer, as I see myself, it was pretty, honestly, terrifying. It was also not without consequence, particularly in my final speculative chapter where I tied together the loose ends of my family's story that no research could answer, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, we're probably all, or a lot of us, language people, so I figured I might kind of walk through how I tried on these different hats in terms of thinking about the genre of these kind of time travel chapters. So I'll pause here to talk about terminology. But in short, I don't know. I distinguish these terms by thinking about pacts, readerly pacts. Of course, Lejeune's famous one on autobiography between the writer and the reader. And to walk through this, I feel like historical fiction draws upon an agreed upon past, using verifiable details from history to secure the story's time period and setting for a reader. The work is historical nonfiction the work is historical fiction rather than nonfiction because the author has stated through labeling the work as fiction that the dialogue/private world of the story is made up. Fine. The characters may be historical people or they may be invented. Through invoking the genre, the writer says to the reader, the story is fiction, but it's plausible that it or something like it could have happened. The story is fiction, but it still maintains elements of truth. In contrast to historical fiction, historical nonfiction maintains the same security of information that the writer of historical fiction promises regarding the story's time period and setting, and it adds another layer of promise. The characters are not made up. The lives as reported in the story are real. The writer promises receipts for the reader. The storytelling is factual above all else. Promise. I've been uncomfortable classifying the chapters that bring Kali Nath's era to life in The Bell and the Body as either historical fiction or historical nonfiction because the work those chapters do is both too true to call them historical fiction and too imagined to call them historical nonfiction. To be honest, the only way I've been able to grapple with writing this story to begin with, as a mixed-race diasporic descendant of this ancestor with my white mom and lack of sustained roots in the subcontinent, is by acknowledging my lens, which places front and center the limitations of my ability to tell this story. Even if I attach the term speculative, which underscores the unknown elements in storytelling, to fiction, I felt that framing wouldn't quite fit either, as it does not center the flawed humanity of the storyteller who's presenting the project. Enter speculative nonfiction. This term has existed as a subgenre for a long time, I don't know, at least since the 2000s. But it's essentially a narrative approach of using speculation and conjecture in nonfiction writing. Can consider what Lisa Note calls perhapsing. I kind of enjoyed this framing. She refers to Maxine Hong Kingston's Woman Warrior, particularly the chapter on No Name Woman. And in guessing at the biological father of her aunt's unborn baby, Kingston writes a series of sentences that begins with perhaps, including, quote, perhaps fields or on the mountain where the daughters-in-law collected fuel, or perhaps he first noticed her in the marketplace, end quote. Later, she writes on other possibilities, even as she disavows them, quote, it could very well have been, however, that my aunt did not take subtle enjoyment of her friend, but a wild woman kept frolicking company. Imagining her free with sex doesn't fit, though, end quote. Thus, through this speculative technique, Kingston makes room for trying on and rejecting information about her ancestors' past that she cannot know. In the process, she resuscitates her from being forgotten. Through the use of this narrative perhapsing, Nope writes, quote, Kingston offers motives, actions, justifications, and specific details that add richness, texture, and complexity absent in her mother's account of her drowned aunt, without crossing the line into fiction, end quote. This defense of Kingston's text as a work of memoir of creative nonfiction is important and speaks to the text's history of earlier failed publication as a work of fiction. The promise to the reader of truth ultimately was the root of the text's literary success. Perhaps, but I digress. I've aligned myself with Kingston's approach and how I've been thinking about the term speculative nonfiction in looking at my ancestors' life in hopes of similarly breathing life into Kali Nath's unknowable past. I do not literally engage in perhapsing in the speculative chapters of The Bell and the Body, but the surrounding chapters make known that I am speculating and trying on truths. This technique has been an important part of how I have approached maintaining truth in the project. I also use the term speculative nonfiction in hopes of recognizing that the truth of the story I try to tell and mess up and try to fix and maybe mess up again is in the honest depiction of how I'm doing just that. I am not an invisible director conjuring a believable past filled with receipts to offer my readers. The mistakes in the story are mine. The mistakes are part of the story, just as I may be part mistake too. Mistaken/limited narrator chosen to tell this story. Mistaken/limited narrator who thinks herself chosen. Whichever it may be, I am a diasporic great-granddaughter doing my best to remember, to reassemble the story of an ancestor who is mine and how all of our ancestors belong to us, for better and for worse. The honesty, the truth in this speculative nonfiction is in how I show my hand in the manuscript and spend time on my knees, scribbling in the dirt to find connection, trying to build a bridge to a past I can never truly know. Sadia Hartman, who coined the term critical fabulation, says in her essay, Venus in Two Acts, quote, "The loss of stories sharpens the hunger for them. So it's tempting to fill in the gaps and to provide closures where there is none, to create a space for mourning where it's prohibited, to fabricate a witness to a death not much noticed," end quote. In my writing, I'd like to say I resisted the temptation to fill in impossible gaps and provide closures where there were none. But ultimately, in my final speculative nonfiction chapter, I struggled with that kind of narrative restraint. Okay, so some examples. My first attempt at writing a speculative nonfiction chapter was probably the easiest one. And it's because another writer had done a lot of the work for me. In 1923, just a few years after Kali Nath was released from prison, a young person named Mulk Raj Anand visited Kali Nath for advice. It turns out that Anand would later become a key English language novelist in his era, and he would write up and publish years later in more than one article his experience in this conversation. This interview is the only surviving relic I found that preserves Kali Nath's speaking voice. The quotes in this chapter are almost entirely from this interview, as Anand wrote it. Animating this discussion felt like a safe, low-stakes writing experiment in speculative nonfiction. So here are a couple of screenshots from one of the articles that reprinted Anand's interview with Kali Nath. As you can see, the text is pretty bare. I mean, it looks like an oral history transcription or even like a screenplay in some ways. And it felt easy enough for me to flesh out based on the information that I had researched, including what the building of the Tribune looked like and how Kali Nath dressed. I found this interview early in my research project since it was readily available online. So the chapter on this interview appears early in my manuscript. In my fleshed out version of this conversation, I blended physical descriptions of Kali Nath that I found in other sources, including V.N. Datta's History of the Tribune, which is the red book in the corner, to set a fuller stage, and I speculated about the state of his office, which I imagined might have mirrored the disheveled way he dressed. Okay, here goes. The drawing pool. I wish I had done that. But this is somebody else, somebody from the Tribune. Okay, so this is coming from chapter 6. During a rare moment of relative quiet at the Tribune newspaper, a young man by the name of Mulk Raj Anand enters Kali Nath's shabby offices. Dusty papers are piled everywhere. Books are splayed on the floor, evidence of quick referencing and feverish writing. The editor-in-chief is hidden somewhere behind this maze of paper piles towering throughout the room. Anand searches for the editor, who he knows is small in stature despite his giant's voice on the page. Not yet a member of India's literary scene to which he is destined to become a star, Mulk Raj Anand is still a young man when he enters Kali Nath's offices with trepidation. He knows Kali Nath was in prison just a few years earlier. Having been released from the same prison that held Kali Nath just 4 years before, Anand is now in Kali Nath's office to ask him for his advice on how to prove to his friends who are still in jail that he has not sold them out to get himself released. Kali Nath is a man of strong reputation. The whole of Punjab rallied for his release from prison. Surely he knows how to help Anand return to good standing with his friends. Anand peers around the stacks of papers in Kali Nath's office and finally locates a man with shrunken shoulders, muttering peculiar sounds to himself while scratching out notes on the page, making final edits on what is probably the next day's editorial. The man is short, his coat of cashmere tweed is threadbare and covered in stains, evidence of absent-minded handling of fish curry, brushgala, and dal bhat. His eyes are completely hidden behind thick lenses. The iron frame of his glasses is held together with cotton thread in at least 3 places. His mouth is pursed in a severe line. He appears to be missing several teeth. He appears to be a person who has not had the time or patience to seek out a dentist. He appears to be someone who does not know how to relax. He appears to be someone who might forget the date or time of day. He's totally absorbed in his work. "Excuse me," Anand says. "Are you Kali Nath ji?" The man calls out to someone behind Anand, who takes the annotated papers from his impatient, outstretched hands, disappearing from the room as quickly as he came. "Sir, namaste," Anand tries again. Kali Nath notices for the first time the young man of no more than 18 years standing in front of his desk. "I am not an Englishman, so don't call me sir. You are?" he asks. Kali Nath's eyebrows dance playfully, like he's egging the young man on. He points to the chair facing his desk. Anand sits down. I'm one of the accused in the Kali Temple conspiracy case. I've been released because I was just visiting Lala Kedarnath and was asleep in the veranda of the shrine. I don't know what the other 5 will think of me. They may suspect me as an informer. Kali Nath takes off his glasses, rubbing his eyes. He looks at Anand sideways. Well, are you an informer? Anand sits up straight in his chair. No, sir, he says eagerly. Again, sir, Kali Nath exclaims. You boys learn to be servile from your English teachers. I had fun cobbling together that scene. It didn't feel like a lot of speculation, to be fair, since I had so many sources helping me put it together. It didn't feel like much risk. This scene was more of a recycling, like a patchwork quilt made of scraps of other people's stories. It felt safe to do. Later, once I arrived at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library in Delhi, which is on the right-hand side there, I started to speculate what Kali Nath's life was like in Lahore before he was incarcerated, and I had to take greater leaps in storytelling. I imagined him at his breakfast table with his wife, his children, of whom he had 2 young sons, my Takuda and his younger brother, asleep in bed as he snuck out to head to the office in the pre-dawn hours. It wasn't until I came across Kali Nath's mercy pleas much later in my research project that I realized his wife had died the year before Kali Nath was incarcerated during the 1918 flu pandemic, and he'd sent his children away. It wasn't until I read his mercy pleas that I and my family learned he had not just 2, but 3 children, including a daughter no one spoke of or even knew existed. Thus, some of these speculative nonfiction chapters ended up writing and then rewriting previous chapters, correcting for what the archives revealed, alongside the chapters that stated how and where I learned more. The narrative stretched and strained toward truth. When he was in prison, he sent out several versions of his mercy plea, a plea for mercy to, 1, be released from the physical labor of grinding corn that he was being tasked with, and then to be actually released, of course, from prison. And I know this is hard to read, but feel bad for me. This is what the kind of microphones look like. It reads, and may not your honors, humble petitioner, in this petition for mercy, make a brief reference to his own domestic circumstance. In October last, during influenza epidemic in Lahore, his wife died, leaving 3 young children who are at present being looked after by his old widowed mother, to whom in this time of her life the effect of the present shock can be better imagined than described. And then he describes his responsibilities as the head of a large family. But at this point in my research, we had no idea that there was a 3rd child. I remember turning to my dad, who was with me in India at the time, and I was like, who is this 3rd kid? And he was like, I don't know, must have been a cousin. But it turned out it was his daughter. And so that became another kind of animating force for my research. So while the act of writing and revising for truth had its own narrative energy for me as a researcher and storyteller, I kept returning to the same questions, and I started to wonder more about my Takuda, my dad's dad. Specifically, I was wondering, how does the son of a freedom fighter leave the subcontinent for good just as it gains the independence his father fought so hard for? Kali Nath died in 1945. Partition happens in 1947, along with India's independence. And then my family left the subcontinent, 3 years later in 1950. So I was really curious about that. And more than that, how does he not pass down his own family story, his own father's story? I visited and revisited these questions kind of throughout the manuscripts. But before I entered this messy and generative approach of speculative nonfiction, there were questions I raised in the text. These were the questions that I raised in the text but never really truly answered. Maybe my Takuda hated Kali Nath, I posited. He was so young when Kali Nath sent him back across the country to Khulna the year after his mother died. My Takuda went on to become a mathematician far removed from politics. Maybe he found Kali Nath to be reckless in his public life, where he risked not only his own life and livelihood in his role as journalist, but he also risked his family since they relied on him. I can imagine this to be true. It was only through writing the speculative nonfiction chapters that I thought to expand those questions about my Takuda and how he did not speak of Kali Nath to include another question. Why did my Takuda never speak of his own sister, Kali Nath's only daughter, who died from TB in 1926 when she was just 18 years old, 2 years after she was married? Her name, I learned, was Tulika. In my last speculative chapter in the manuscript, my perhapsing muscles were warm and humming, freed of the self-consciousness I may have felt in my experiments with earlier chapters. Could the answers to these questions be tied to each other, I wondered. Before engaging in speculative nonfiction, I had never considered that question before. In earlier versions of this manuscript, I had only ever thought about trying to solve the mystery of why Kali Nath's story wasn't passed down. Stumbling upon Trulita was an aside to the story. Could the disappearance of Trulita from my family memory and the suppression of Kali Nath's story be connected to each other, I wondered. Could there even be a causal link between these silences? Life rarely ties off loose threads so neatly, but nevertheless, as I thought about these potentially interconnected questions, a speculative scene rose up from the unknowable fog. So I'm going to read this chapter that I kept kind of teasing earlier, and then a little bit of the following one, which is set in 2014. So this first part is in Khulna, which is in Bengal, in 1926. The wailing can be heard all the way to the street front from Beni Babu Road, even though those crying the hardest are confined to the central courtyard, where their sound ought to be insulated from outsiders by the home's many walls and burnt brick construction. The sorrow emanating from the house is so heavy, even the roof, already sloped for rain drainage, complete with terracotta ornamentation, seems to sag under the weight of the family's grief. A servant was sent to travel the few miles from Trulita's married home, where her body lies with her husband and his family. Trulita was sick. Her family knew. They stayed away once they got word of how her coughs were staining her palms with blood. It was the white plague, robber of youth. There was the fear of transmission, a fear well-grounded, said so many suffered once they got it. Unmarried women lost marriage prospects if they had tuberculosis. Married women experienced mistreatment by their spouses, the fear of relapse during pregnancy and miscarriage increasing the stigma. The disease rose alongside British industrialization and crowded, unsanitary living conditions. Tuberculosis became known as a poor person's disease. It is Rajayakshma, the king of diseases, some whisper behind their hands, amulets of the Varana tree hanging from their necks. Trulita's Takuma and brother stayed away, even as they waited anxiously for the news of her recovery. This is a disease that isn't supposed to touch upper caste people like Trulita and her family. She's the only daughter of Kali Nath Roy, famed journalist in Punjab, he who Gandhi himself raised up when he was imprisoned, he who became known as a symbol of the free press. She is a daughter in her second year of marriage and motherless for the past 8 years, since she was just 10. She is a daughter given a name for a vine, for the growth she would bring, a name that means intersection. It's perhaps no wonder that this girl, named for interconnectedness, died when she was pruned of both parents, her mother dying before she reached womanhood and her father sending her away not long after. She was ostracized by her in-laws and her family of origin before she died. These separations are what brings her death ever nearer, faster, even as she was already being ravaged by disease. By the time the news reaches her brothers and her Takuma, her father's mother, at the home on Beni Babu Road, her brothers close themselves into their room where they do not speak. They listen to their Takuma wail with the servants in the courtyard. Their Takuma is the one who oversaw her granddaughter's wedding. Her son, the girl's father, was suspicious of the match and took some cajoling to consent to the marriage. He was so far away in Lahore and too busy to come home to investigate the boy and his family. It was Trulita's Takuma who took charge. She is the one to whom all 3 children were sent once their mother had died from the deadly flu in 1918. She's had the charge of these children. Her son, so far away in Lahore, entrusted them to her. What could she have done that was so wrong that God would rebuke her like this, to make her suffer so much loss in her late life, to suffer the impossible of watching her son becoming a widower and then being imprisoned on the brink of his own death, only for his daughter to die? She sends word to Kali Nath via telegraph of Trulita's passing. His response arrives via electrical pulses sent down a wire, the pulses translating to dots and dashes that an operator turns into language, printed on a crisp page that arrives to the front door of the house on Beni Babu Road. One line resounds: "We will not speak of this, of her, again." A lancing of the heart, a cutting from the body, a whole vital organ, excised like it never existed. Behind their closed door, the brothers receive their father's command and see this from the man who had let their mother die when they were boys. The year after he'd been so reckless and obsessed with politics, he let himself be imprisoned. He abandoned them, sent them away, motherless children banished to their Takuma's home across the country from the world they knew. He hardly even visited them. He didn't hear how Terulita cried herself to sleep for years, how the brothers gathered at the silty banks of the Vairab, that river swollen with the waters of the Ganga, named for a fierce manifestation of Lord Shiva, god of destruction, of transformation, of time. The boys stopped just short of throwing themselves into the river's gray body, so consumed were they with grief. How dare this man demand this now, the second death of their just-gone sister, to act as if she never existed? But the only thing less possible than forgetting their sister is the idea of disobeying their Baba. The sons know they have no choice. The elder, Samarendranath, who is now a man of 20, looks down at his younger brother, Arunendranath, who is just 13 years old. Samarendranath knows he is the one who must give direction, who must make the decision of what they'll do, how they'll respond, how they'll move forward. He spits out, "We won't speak of her. Baba demands it." Arunendranath looks up at his elder brother in disbelief. He begins to protest. Samarendranath raises his hand in a signal telling him to wait. "But if we're not to speak of her again, I swear, once the bastard dies," he says, referring to Kali Nath, their own father, "we will not hold up his name either." Arunendranath looks up at his elder brother with tears streaming down his face, a rage unspoken setting the flat line of his lips. Over the course of the rest of their lives, the boys succeed. They tell their descendants of how their father was a journalist, how he was principled, but they do not say more. They do not celebrate him. They tamp down the rest of the story just as they bury, dutifully, impossibly, the existence of their sister. They keep this as a promise that they sink into each other. Meanwhile, across the country, in a house devoid of relatives, Kali Nath shuts himself inside with a telegram telling of Terulita's passing. He grips his chest, his asthmatic breathing labored and shallow. His response to his mother, to be transmitted to his sons, was unthinkable. He knows that. A man devoted to journalism, the writing of history as it's lived, understands that it's no small act to strike a person from memory. But he knows, too, that the only thing more impossible than forgetting his daughter is admitting he's the one who lost her, that he sent her across the country to his mother and let her be married into a family he did not know, and lost her to a disease that by birth and caste ought never to have touched her. The act of remembering her is too much for him to bear. It would break him. He, head of his extended network of family who relies upon him, cannot break. If he breaks, his family will suffer worse than when he was imprisoned and almost died. Worse yet, remembering his daughter could kill him, and then what would his family do? Inside the quiet confines of his home, he hears the neighborhood woman rapping at the door to be let in to make him dinner. He turns the lock and shoos her away. He does not undress or wash. He presses himself into his bed, grief washing over him for his loss and for what he's done, for what he is commanding his surviving family to do, to bleach from their lips Terulita's name. And this is chapter 44 in 2014. I was swallowed in the haze of imagining Terulita's existence. I wondered if I was forcing a puzzle piece into a hole I knew I would never be able to fill, of why Kali Nath's story wasn't passed down to his descendants. Still, I wondered if I was right. I wondered if Kali Nath wanted me to know this. Maybe his grief and regret were why he sought out a descendant in me to uncover his story, so we of the next generation could all once again speak his daughter's name. Perhaps he wanted more than his own story to be remembered. Maybe, all the way from the ancestral realm, he was actually asking for forgiveness. Okay, my dad, my sisters. This is a little person taking this picture. It's not, nobody's getting flipped off, don't worry. I thought about this before I put that up there. Okay, so my dad has read and reread this manuscript in all of its forms. He is 83 now, and he was actually really energetic in response to this latest incarnation. I really feel like I know so much more about our family, he said. We talked about the experimental chapters and the questions I raised in these speculative tellings. It's true that Baba didn't speak of Kali Nath, he told me. I wondered if that speculation I presented in the final experimental chapter could be true. Then Dad said, "Gosh," and my Baba called him a bastard. My breath caught in my throat. "I made that up. You remember that?" I reminded him. "Oh, right." He trailed off. Only his upper face was visible on my phone screen, eyes and confused-looking eyebrows. That is the danger in writing stories like these, of course. In an effort to uncover the past in the realm of speculative possibility, in an effort to draw the past close enough to feel, touch, and taste, we risk inception. My memoir chapters affirm my perhapsing approach to speculation, but we still run the risk, it seems, of a speculative story being mistaken for the truth. This wouldn't be the first time this happened. "Tell my people I tried" are the last words many believed King Kala ever spoke. As it turns out, this quote may have first appeared in The Last King of Paradise, a 1952 biographical novel where the reader simply made up those words. The risk in speculative writing, fictional or non-fictional it seems, is you might accidentally rewrite history. Of course, in my text, I was not rewriting the final words of a king. But even when writing family stories, speculation can be dangerous. So again, why do this? I probably have scared you off of the idea of speculative nonfiction at this point, but I will make a plug for it. The experience for me of engaging in speculative nonfiction to write my ancestors' story resulted in a range of takeaways for me. I was moved by the degree of empathy I felt activated in me as I tried to write my ancestors' life. Speculative nonfiction acknowledged that I cannot make a bridge to an unknowable past, but it did close some gaps between Kali Nath and me. In this writing, I have felt him near. That's ultimately what I longed for since I first stumbled upon his name. Maybe that action of drawing each other near is more important than deciding what to call it. We need our revolutionary ancestors near now more than ever, don't we? I hope that in hearing about this writing project, you'll get a moment to close your eyes and feel the ancestors you need to call on standing beside you too. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Anjoli, and we now have some 15 to 20 minutes for questions.
I know that you completed your MA here, and then I think you went back to New York City, and then you decided to come back for a PhD. How did coming back for a PhD help you get to the place you're in now?
Yeah, thanks for knowing my biography. Yeah, so it was helpful in a lot of ways, I think. For my master's thesis, I wrote a novel a failed novel. I say that with some love for that project. It was about this is relevant to mention. It was about a person who, let me see, how do I say this? It's been a while since I talked about that project. It was about a mixed race, kind of diasporic protagonist who looked a lot like me, making a lot of mistakes in regards to her kind of cultural identity. And it was a failed project because I didn't actually know more than she did. So I really was struggling with how to articulate that. And when I went back to New York, I was a grant writer for a couple of years, but I also started teaching, and it was being in the classroom where I really realized that I felt activated and alive and underskilled. But I was like, I would like more training in this. And then I also I wanted to go deeper in learning more about my family, and I had, as a young person, internalized this fiction, which was that if I wasn't raised knowing something about my family, it was because I didn't deserve to know it. And that was like a real wound that I had to deal with. And I remember my friends being like, Roy, it's not that big of a deal. Like, it's like any other subject area, just like look it up. I was like, I can do that? Like, really, I'm allowed? And so, yeah, the PhD program was really amazing for me for a variety of reasons, including because I was part of this really amazing cohort of people who I'm still connected to and who I love and admire, who are like guiding posts in my life. And also getting the experience of being able to be with these amazing professors and take risks in storytelling and really getting to dive into the ancestral research meant quite a lot to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question.
Thank you so much. I'm thinking a lot about the process of kind of basing this in research and basing the speculative in research. But I, in my own kind of speculative nonfiction writing, kind of feel myself losing that in the more speculative moments. I really struggle with am I just you know, is it just my voice that's coming through? Am I leaving room for my ancestors to talk? And then also, like, do I have enough to say? Like, am I just going to end up saying the same thing over and over again?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Seriously.
Those are such, yep. I mean, it was funny even getting ready for this talk and trying to pull out. I was like, oh, I'll read the first speculative chapter and the last one. That kind of shows the development of my approach to this technique. But there's such a departure. And even as I was reading this out loud to you, I was like, I am out of pocket. Like, I'm making so many, like, how dare you, right? Like, where are the receipts? There are no receipts, right? Other than Tarulita died, and then she had TB, and then nobody spoke of her, right? Like, that's pretty much as far as that goes. And all the rest of it, it's just, I'm imagining it. So I don't know, for me, I ultimately felt like it felt important to allow myself to kind of run into that space and just observe that world as it rose up. Because that's what it felt like. It felt like it was kind of rising up in front of me. I wasn't like, and then he's gonna do, like, I wasn't playing with dolls, you know? It felt like this was like, oh my God, what if that's what happened? And then it like kind of became this like world that I was walking in. But for me, the really important thing were the partnering chapters where I'm talking about the like, wait, I have no idea what I just, like that couldn't possibly, and what do I actually know? And, you know, so that, again, that's kind of where I'm like in front of the camera in all of my angst and limitations, which maybe is annoying, but it wouldn't have felt truthful without that acknowledgement too, if that makes sense. Yeah, there's no real way. I mean, Kali Nath doesn't come to me in my dreams and tell me like, and like pat me on the head or anything. But there is something to be said for that feeling of like calling someone in my experience. But that's kind of witchy. It's October. Sorry.
It's always a huge pleasure to listen to you write and also to work on your work. And you've gone from belly buttons to great grandfathers. Incredible range. Really, in your talk, you make this distinction between veracity and truth.
Yeah,
I
I knew it. I was like, don't say this in front of the center provider.
I'm not sure if that is so much my question, but something else that really resonated with me as you were speaking is that line in Kali Nath's Mercy poem about the situation of his mother being better imagined than described.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that
Thank you for that,
connected, right, to the idea
sure.
of what is veracity, what is truth in speculative nonfiction.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that's a strategic rhetorical move on his part.
Yeah.
But it seems also something that you might be doing in this project. It's sort of inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's right there, and I just didn't, I didn't see it. I appreciate that. That's helpful.
Can I just pile on? A journalist to say something would be better imagined than described. It's a whole other thing. It's,
Well,
yeah.
I thought you wanted to say something.
No. Just letting that soak in.
Anjoli, for this talk, I'm so excited for it because I didn't know how that story evolved. And just the way in which you really like to the forefront. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your reference to disease and past.
Yeah.
And whether like how you sustain that in this stories and across the
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think one of the most vexing things when I learned about, even when we got to Tarulita's name, and that wasn't until the end of this research project when I was sitting with the eldest of my family, who was like, oh yeah, Tarugi, like, what are you talking about? That was his sister. And my dad was with me at this point in the trip too, and he was like, what do you mean my Baba had a sister? Like, why would he never have spoken of her? And he was really like upset about it. And Monikaka, my great uncle, was just like, she had TB. And that was kind of the full explanation. And I went home like I was staying with my cousins, and when we were staying together that night, we were looking over, I had, recorded the interview, and this ancestor, he's an ancestor now, this great uncle was moving in and out of Bengali, and I don't have Bengali to refer to. So I was thinking maybe he said something more that wasn't in English that I missed. And my cousin was like, no, that's all he said. And I was like, why would you never speak of someone again because of TB? And my cousin was like, it was a four-person's disease. And then that was like the full explanation too. And so it's like, that's the one explanation that kind of came to the surface. And you can't talk about that without talking about caste and privilege and expectations about longevity and disease and who's deserving or expected to die of what. And so it's alarming in some way, I mean, many ways. And it's not the focal point in those chapters necessarily, but I felt like it was an important thing to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And thank you for that you have a new
Oh yeah, yeah, of course, right? Yeah, we have to do that. Our names are important.
Thank you for such an interesting and beautiful journey together in your talk. And I just feel grateful for you and the way that you think about storytelling, and it was so generous all that you were inviting us into, and it also just made me think about a lot of other things. So more affirmation that I think the story is meaningful, the way you're telling it is meaningful for other people, even if this is not my family. And I love that reframing of veracity, or just thinking about how we're framing things. That's really important. And it reminded me of this great talk I went to a couple weeks ago. It was an evaluation conference, and like rethinking evaluation. So a lot around like, let's change the terms, use the terms in everything. And this woman from Calcutta, this like tiny, like very well known in evaluation and teaching in New Zealand. She's like very tiny, very strong. And she's like, yeah, we've got to change all these terms. So like, we talk about, we're doing studies and, in our nonprofits or in government or as educators, whatever, we're doing studies and we're talking about replication, we're talking about outcomes and fidelity, truth, or veracity. But if we shift it, it really opens up a whole other world of possibilities. So she was like, instead of replication, like replicating a study, we should think in terms of gifting. Instead of outcomes, we should think about obligations that come out of whatever the project is. Let's measure that. And then instead of fidelity, we should think about Papa Papa or Mokulama or genealogy. And like, let's focus on these things and not that. So I was just curious if gifting or obligation, gifting instead of replicating, or the obligations as like this beautiful thing that comes out instead of outcomes, or instead of fidelity. If just any of those terms resonate for you, thinking about your experience so far.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I mean, yes. I think when I was doing this research in 2014, I was in a very different place in my life. And I was kind of thinking about, do we have these roles, to locate this in myself, do I have a role in my family as being a backstitcher? Like I'm holding a story together, I'm holding a story together, and that's my orientation is to the past, and this is my contribution to my family. And when and if the young people in my family want this, and I have something that I can give them to help them see who we've been, and open up potentials for who they can be. Can I give them something I didn't have when I was growing up? And I think when I'm thinking about that genealogy piece now, it's different as a parent, right? My kid is 2.5, and I talk to her about Kali Nath a lot. She's listening or not, I don't know. But I left her this morning, and I was like, I'm gonna give a talk on Kali Nath today. And she's like, oh, Kali Nath, like whatever. Again, she doesn't care. But I mean, I think we're always trying to, I don't know, make grand statements that we want to welcome back immediately. I oftentimes want to give myself the things I didn't have, and then make sure that the things I did have are also healthy and alive and there. And I think that a lot of us probably live this way. And I think about that in relation to the story too. And so that's, again, kind of medicine within my own family, but yeah, I hope that, in looking at the ways that we tell our stories and relate to our ancestors, so this is always an invitation for us all to be in conversation and to share and to imagine ourselves in our communities and how we can hold each other up. Because there are a lot of forces at play that are trying to make us feel powerless and disconnected, and like our histories don't matter, and like there's never been a history of ever fighting off anything awful, and it's not looking true. And so that's really important in our knowing as well.
Just wanted to add real quick, like I was really moved by this person reframing evaluation, and listening to you made me like see another layer of it, because how you presented it was like your conversation. This is your conversation with and these other people. And like replication, outcomes, fidelity, like there's no people in that, but the words gifting, replication, so it's all about people and relationship with each other, conversation with each other. So, yeah, I love that reminder. So, yeah, that we're in relationship.
Oh yeah.
Thanks, Anjoli. It's been great meeting your work for the first time. I think 2 words came to mind. The first one is permission. And I think I'm asking this or responding to this as someone who's also trying to write about ancestors and thinking about erased stories. I'm interested to know, especially with family histories, like whose permission did you feel you needed to get to do this project? And what kind of permission did you feel you needed to give yourself to do this project? The second word is allow. Sorry, it's an awkward word. But I'm wondering, having completed this manuscript, what did you think completing it allowed you to do? Or what did it allow you to write about after?
Yeah, thank you for that. I felt like by stumbling upon all this online, that was kind of like, I feel like I'd stumbled into another realm. It's like, what the hell is this? And once my cousins were like, what the hell is this? And I was like, hang on, I had this opportunity to go to India, like to apply for this grant, and that was amazing. And it just felt like the doors were kind of like flying open. Like it was like a little energy suck into that direction, which felt affirming to me. I mean, when I arrived to Calcutta in 2014, my family was like, you need to speak with Monikaka, who was the eldest, that great uncle. And he was overcoming an injury, and so he wasn't ready to receive visitors. He was 92 at the time. And so I ended up going to Delhi and other regions with my dad. And so it wasn't until after I'd stumbled upon the mercy plea and had all these other questions that I never would have had if I hadn't gone that way first, that I was able to come back and actually ask that of Monikaka. And I mean, that was like breaking the cardinal rule in research, right? With like family histories, you always go to the oldest person first, right? You have to go to the person with the greatest knowledge. And he had all of this, but like, I wondered now still, had I not felt I had the permission to go right into the archives and do this like very academic research first, would I have known to ask him these questions? And even if he had shared it, would we just have shrugged and been like, oh, yeah, I guess there was like a daughter or something. I don't know. Would we not have made as much of it? I'm not sure. In terms of feeling allowed to do something, I don't know. I mean, I feel a compulsion to get this book out. And that like hasn't gone away, and it's been 11 years, so there's that. I don't know if there's more to this story that I might end up writing as something else in the future. I mean, I think that there's a lot that I'm still learning from Kali Nath. But yeah, there's no like second book project kind of calling out to me as of this moment. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I'm really touched by that moment with your dad, where he sort of misremembers. And I said sort of misremembers because I think I also read it as this has been a gap for him in finding this one sound is in that gap. And I'm just wondering about your dad's, when you share it, if your dad's an unusual journey, because you're going into the archive. This information is coming out, and he's there, hearing the interviews too, and he's like right beside you in all these moments. It just seems it's just like an incredible thing.
Yeah, I mean, the experience of, he was able to come for one of the 2 months when I was in 2014. And then we went back again in 2019, and like I said, he's read all the million versions of this freaking story. And he has his own kind of persistent questions that would look into his mind, and I'd have to be like, Dad, we answered that one. Oh, like this Angie's name is Kishi. Like, yeah, we know her name, whatever. Like I sent him and resent him the family tree that my architect cousin drew out for us once we started filling in all these gaps. And I have the blog that I kept, and I can take screenshots of that and send it. So, I mean, it's in support of our memory, but it was helpful. I guess this kind of gets back to the idea of permission too. It was helpful for me to see that I was not the only one obsessed. And then actually my family in Calcutta, like we all were coming together too. Like I had a cousin who had gone through like a pretty hairy divorce and was like not leaving the house, and she got really obsessed with it also, and we ended up sleuthing together, and it was like this collective experience that extended beyond just me, and that was, I think, part of the excitement. I mean, I send my dad everything. He's said, like one day you'll find someone more interesting than me to write about. I mean, I guess I write about him and Kali Nath here, but a lot of my stuff is just about my dad and trying to make sense of him too. So I sent him a copy of this talk. He like read this where I'm like teasing him for misremembering even, and he's like, oh, it happened, it's fine. So yeah, I feel really grateful to have him in my corner and to be so supportive, because I know a lot of people don't experience that with their loved ones.
And this is my own memory of the long haul, but in some ways you could argue you spent the last 10 years turning your dad into a perfect reader. Because he was with you in 2014, and I remember some of the strongest parts of the dissertation, I don't know if it's still in there, was actually going to the school that he had gone to, and actually being able to observe how he was responding to suddenly realizing that this was an important part of his life. So in some way, and I'm sure he read that account of you registering that. So that kind of constant interplay and realizing that, I go as far as to say it's probably one of the strongest aspects, or certainly a strong aspect of your relation to your father now, is the mediation of your writing in relation to that. So that I'm not surprised that he would be able to read this and not find it a great revelation, but a kind of affirmation of a relationship that already exists.
Thank you. Yeah.
Do you have time for one more? This is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
I'm just curious, do you ever at any point think that it would be useful to know a South Asian language while you're doing this research? And do you have any plans?
No, I literally say this in my classrooms to my students all the time, where I'm like, it's never too late, blah, but I'm like, listen. Yes, 100%. I mean, especially in the final days of the 2014 research, when I was, like, my family all was gathering, like, maternal and paternal sides, and we were all telling stories, and people were flipping in and out of English and Bengali, and I was catching what I could and interjecting where I could, but I have the recordings, but I don't have, like, subtitles running or something. So I'm very aware that I'm only having one experience because of this limitation, and it's not one that I have to necessarily accept. I mean, obviously language acquisition in your 40s is different than when you're younger, but like, I could do this. Like, there's really no excuse.
Anjoli, why aren't you doing that on top of everything else? writing your book and teaching your classes and raising your child. Come on. Anyway, okay. Everyone, please join me in thanking